Hey, welcome to Performance Anxiety. I'm your host, Mark. And before we get started with this show, I want to thank our sponsor, AKG, for sending us their Podcaster Essentials kit. It comes with an amazing set of headphones and an incredible Lyra mic. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, this is a high-quality, low-cost way to do it. Bob Lord does a lot of things. He's the CEO of PARMA Recordings. He's the bassist for the long-running, genre-defying band Dreadnaught. And now he can add solo artists to his list. He has recorded what can only be described as possibly the most eclectic album of the year, called Playland Arcade. It's filled with surfing western sounds, orchestral snippets, and 8-bit jams. Bob also talks about the future of classical music and artists. It's a lot funnier than it sounds. And there's a whole lot more in this show. Follow Bob at Bob Lord Music on social media. Pick up the album Playland Arcade if you want a fun album. Follow us at Performance ANX. Help us get in front of more folks with 5-star reviews and ratings. We accept coffee at ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety. Merch is at performanceanx.threadless.com. So get your quarters out and let's get into Playland Arcade with Bob Lord on Performance Anxiety, part of the Pantheon Podcast Network.
My name is Bob Lord. I am a recovering bass player, composer, and CEO of a company called PARMA Recordings. I'm also a co-founder and bassist for a band called Dreadnaught, and now a solo artist. And my new record, Playland Arcade, comes out on 4/27. That is the 27th of April, and I encourage you all to check it out and listen to it. And I am here on the Performance Anxiety podcast to share a little bit about what I do, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So thanks so much. I'm an early riser. I'm usually up around 4 o'clock.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So by this time of the day, I've pulled out massive clumps of my hair, and just out of stress. So it has to regrow overnight so I can look good.
I was going to say you've got an amazing barber then, because the pictures I've seen, you look like you have a full head of hair. So I'm impressed.
I do. And my college ID, I saw it a long time ago. It's someplace buried in here, but from UVM. And I looked at the picture and I realized that my hair was so huge it didn't even fit in the frame. And it was like substantially outside the frame. It was funny.
God.
I'm in no rush, by the way. I'm at the end of my day, so take your time.
Okay, good.
Actually, that's a lie. There's going to be a martini and some shit posting on social media when I get done. But still.
Awesome. Well, I've got my couple fingers of Knob Creek right now, so I'm good.
There you go. Good man.
I am ready. What is going on with this? Oh, the hell with it. I'll just wing that part of it. How's that? That's a good plan. Just wing.
There you go. That's all I do. I've learned the more I prepare, the worse I do.
Yeah. It's kind of funny you mention that, because I've come to the realization that the more I worry about being prepared for guests, the less I have to worry, because the conversation just kind of flows. It just kind of goes.
That's cool. Yeah, I've learned my lesson over the years. Like, it's funny when I'm learning music. Like, if I learn it off of the paper, I'm never going to get off the paper. If I learn it by ear, it's always going to be in my ear. And I just learned, like, once I learn something, it just, it's in my head, and I go with it. I wrote this blog post. I pushed it out today, and I guess I've been like, quote unquote, writing it mentally for a while. Yeah. Hadn't even really consciously strung anything together, and I just sat down and just went. It basically all came out in one lump,
Oh man,
and
nice.
It's just, but that's kind of how I do stuff, even like writing. Stuff processes in the background quite a bit, and then once you get around to it, it's like, oh yeah, it was actually in there the whole time. Okay, cool.
Oh gosh, ooh, that Knob Creek tastes good.
Oh man,
I gave up alcohol for Lent, so this is like one of the first drinks I've had in a long time.
Nice. I've been trying to stay away on the weeknights, just because I got to get up early.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I remember a few years ago though, I gave up booze for like a month and a half. I lost like 12 pounds. It was hysterical,
It's crazy. Oh, sorry for the typo last night. That was. Oh. I could have sworn I wrote tomorrow evening and not tonight evening. So.
That was wicked funny because I'm like such a freak about my schedule, like literally when people say, when I say I'm going to call someone at whatever time, I sit there and I wait until, the hand hits the 12.
Yep.
And then right at that moment, I hit the final number of the button. Like I'm nuts like that.
I
so
do that
when I
too
see
with
something
this.
like that, yeah. And if I see something like that, it's like, holy fuck, did I fuck it up? And it's like, I immediately go into only child mode.
Yep.
You did it wrong. You're wrong. Like, no. So it was a relief when I found out I wasn't fucked up. So it was great. Thank you.
I wish I could say that was the worst typo I've ever done with a guest, but it's not. I don't know if you had a chance to go back and look at any of the episodes, but one of the ones I had was this chef Selena Tio, and she's amazing. I love her to death, and I've reached out to her because she was on Top Chef Masters and Iron Chef America, and she was in the final 4 of Top Chef Masters and almost beat Michael Simon on Iron Chef America, and she owns a restaurant in Kansas City, and one of her employees was in a band. One of her bartenders was in a band that I had on the podcast, a band called Vast Robot Armies. And the guy's name's John. And he's like, man, you got to have my boss on. Sure. Who's your boss? So he's explaining who she was. So I'm like, all right, well, ask her if she's interested, and then I'll take it from there. So he asked her, and he's like, all right, here's her phone number. Just shoot her a text and tell her that I gave you the number. So sent her a text, and I was like, yeah, I usually record on weekdays because I have a day job, and weeknights 8 p.m. Eastern. But if that's an issue with the restaurant, weekends are always an option. Something to that effect. But it changed the word always to anal.
Oh no.
So like my first text to her, it's like, if not, we can also on the weekend or something. And I changed it to, I can do it anal on the weekend.
And it's so brutal.
And this is the first communication I've had with this lady. She didn't respond immediately. And so I'm like, okay, well, let me see. And I read it. I'm like, and I said, oh, okay, well, I've screwed this up. So I'm just going to lean into it. So I replied, I said, I'm sorry. That was a typo. I apologize. I always do anal on the weekdays.
Oh my God. This is like a Basil Fawlty issue.
Yeah.
Right?
So she just responded with the crying, laughing emoji and said, oh, yeah, no problem. Weekdays are fine.
Oh my God, it's great. That's great.
I figured she's either going to be a good sport. I've either lost her already or she's going to be a good sport. So I leaned into it.
I agree with that totally. It really tells you where you stand very quickly.
Yeah. You bring anal into it. It's, immediately where you stand.
Exactly.
So
great.
What I like to do is to find out, obviously you're here for a reason. You're a successful musician and CEO, but I want to find out how you got to that point. So what I like to do is find out where you came from and how you got into music in the first place. Was there a lot of music in the house growing up, or was that something that you're the black sheep of the family? You're the only one that was really into music?
There wasn't a ton of music in my house growing up. My parents were, I think, like all parents of my generation, they were into the stuff that was on the radio at the time.
Yeah.
And I recall hearing a lot of music when I would go shopping with my mom when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And I think that was one of the reasons for my very early hatred of Steely Dan, which of course I've come completely full circle.
Okay,
but
good.
Every time I go into like a Marshall's or a TJ Maxx and I'd hear Steely Dan, I just cringe.
Oh.
But I think I got a lot of my music from my cousin Jeff, who was a real kind of prog rock fan way back when. So I heard Rush. I wouldn't say I heard Tom Sawyer the day it came out, but not that long after.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then also my best friend Jeff, a different Jeff, who grew up with me. We grew up together in Andover, Mass, and we're both only children. I'm of Italian descent. He's Jewish, so like very similar kind of upbringing in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
And his dad had a huge record collection that we would just go through when we were kids. So that's where I got like my earliest contact with all my favorite stuff, the Beatles, the Who, all this kind of great 60s, 70s stuff.
When did you start learning to play music? Was that something that you'd asked to do, or was it something you were forced into lessons for?
No, absolutely not. So I was like an artsy kid growing up. I was always into drawing and reading and making sounds and whatever. I was into that stuff. Comic books were a super early passion, and they still are. I love comics, and I love to read. But it was never anything that was kind of pushed on me. And I did kind of muck around a little bit when I was a kid with keyboards and different kinds of sounds and stuff. But nothing really stuck until I heard the Who play. And I mean, I'd heard their music before, and I'd come into contact with it, of course. But when I really saw the group, not live, but on videotapes and such, it was like, whoa, wait a minute. Now this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I was a little kid. So I think I was 12 years old, and I picked up the bass. A lot of my friends, my buddy Jeff that I just mentioned included, were all starting to pick up guitar. And it seemed like the right thing to do. Plus, of the members of the Who, it really was John Entwistle that I saw, and I'm like, oh man, that's a cool sound.
Wow.
And,
okay.
And of course Pete Townshend too. Hearing his guitar and hearing the two of them in that interplay, that's really what kind of made me do it.
Interesting. You don't hear about too many people saying the bass is what they were first drawn to. That's really interesting.
Well, even as a younger listener, I was really into the Beatles as a kid. I got those Beatles blue and red compilation albums.
Yep.
And I ripped through that blue on like multiple copies of that tape. But I always loved the sound of McCartney's bass, even as a kid, because usually, especially in the later material, it's mixed so forward. It's so round and beautiful, and it even glistens a little bit, which a lot of bass doesn't, right? Or in that era because of the recording techniques.
Right, yeah.
So I was predisposed, and then you hear Entwistle, who's like turning the treble up to 10, turning the mids up to 10. It's like, I love that. What is that? How do you do that?
So when did you start playing in bands? Who were you playing with? Your buddy Jeff? Was that how you started playing out?
Yeah. And my buddy Ed Jurdy, who is in a band called the Band of Heathens, and also a band called Trigger Hippie. The drummer is Steve Gorman from the Black Crowes. So we had like a really we had like a really cool crew of kids when I was young, and we just started playing together right away. And it's weird because we all took it seriously right away. And I say this frequently, but in Andover, Mass, in my graduating kind of classes, and when I was in high school, we had a ton of kids come out of that era that have all gone into really meaningful artistic careers. And it's an amazing thing when you stop and think about it, that at this really young age, you're all kind of working together, collaborating, competing. And it's all these wonderful things mixed together. And it made us all better musicians. And it's really weird because Ed and I still work together. My buddy Will Daly, who also went to school with us at the same time, same class, we're working together, and it's just, it goes to show that the people that are involved with you at a formative state, your trajectories, they go in different directions, but those angles are never so important or severe as they are early on. And those set us off on these paths. Right. And it's just interesting to see how it all goes. But yeah, we started playing right away. I played my first gig when I was 12 or 13, produced my first recording, such as it was, when I was 14, did my first mini tour when I was like 15 and a half.
Oh my gosh.
But by mini tour, I mean, we went to New York for the weekend, but still, it was really cool, right?
Hey, anything outside your immediate township.
Definitely.
That's a tour.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's crazy because the kids in the band that played the first gig that I ever played at, we're all still working professionally. It's a crazy thing.
That's amazing. And I've found that happens occasionally. I'm trying to remember who. I've had one or two other guests where they were in early bands and everybody in that band is still in the business. It does not happen very often. It's really amazing when I hear that story.
And, it's really gratifying because when I talk to my buddies who, we grew up doing this or who've been in the business for a really, really long time, there's a method of communication that's possible. And plus, each other really well. And you've all been through the hammers of goddamn hell. Yeah. So there's that kind of commonality that makes you speak the same language. And it's just interesting how many people, kind of fall off. And it's okay. I tell a ton of people in my quote unquote day job as a CEO of a classical music company. Yeah. I tell a ton of people, listen, you don't have to do this professionally. It's not incumbent upon you to make it your living or your vocation. It's okay if music is just a fun thing. It just so happens for me, it's a complete fucking obsession. So
yeah, I know this. I did that with photography, so
sure,
that was my thing. But all right, so you mentioned that you are the CEO of classical music record. Is it a label? Or how does it work? Because it's like studio without a studio, and
yeah, interesting analysis. Yeah, you basically hit the nail on the head. It's everything that a music company could possibly do, in a way. And so we're like a production company, parent company of a number of record labels. We have a creative agency. We do a lot of work in studio production, and also, kind of release commercially all the work that we do. But we have departments in graphic design, publicity, royalty administration, publishing. Wow. It's a crazy kind of vertically integrated company, to use an old 80s term, right? Yeah. And it's interesting because I did the rock and roll thing, right? I tried to do the rock and roll thing. I mean, I still do the rock and roll thing. My band's been around for 25 years, my band Dreadnaught.
Yeah.
But, in high school and getting into college, all my experiences in that time, which were pre-professional, semi-professional, however you want to look at it, it's a grayscale, right? You kind of ease into this business. You don't even know it.
Right.
But all those experiences of having to be the booking agent, having to lick the envelopes and send out the newsletters, having to staple gun up the posters, all these things that people don't do anymore. All that, it kind of informed the way I did stuff. So I just was always doing an awful lot of the coverage of all the functions that one would do, right? It wasn't just, I'm going to pick up my bass and go play the gig when someone calls me. Right. I mean, I'm starting the gig, I'm managing the gig, I'm publicizing the gig. And that kind of carried through into this kind of phase of my life in this PARMA Recordings company, where it's natural for me to do that and to be not only an advocate for myself and my own company, but to advocate on behalf of other people, other artists, other creators. And wow. It's been an interesting career path, I can tell you that.
Now, were you always interested in classical and orchestral music?
No, absolutely not. I mean, not beyond Bugs Bunny or Tom and Jerry, right? I think it's fascinating how many people first heard that music in that kind of bracket, in that age bracket. Mr. Rogers, right? My first introduction to jazz was because of Mr. Rogers and Joe Negri. My first introduction to classical music was Warner Brothers. And it's hysterical. Like, you always think about the bad guy theme when, like, somebody's tied up on the railroad tracks, the beautiful, blonde is on the railroad tracks, and the bad guy's throwing his mustache. Yep. You always would hear that play. Well, that's the Earl King by Schubert, right? I mean, it's this classical music. But you just didn't know it. You just didn't know it at the time. And so for me, listening to music, I just kind of always followed my ear, right? So I started off listening to rock and roll. I got more into more sophisticated prog rock, like Yes, Rush, like I said before. And then, began to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So by the time I heard 20th century classical, which is what really hooked me, Stravinsky, Aaron Copland, Bela Bartok, Bernstein, William Schumann, these kinds of guys. By the time I got to that, I was completely prepped. I was primed. The thing is, most people come at it from learning how to play Bach or Mozart or whatever on the piano when they're 3 years old. Right. And it was the exact opposite for me. I just literally was like, that sounds interesting. What's next? That's interesting. What's next? And the next thing I knew, I was in this world where I couldn't reverse engineer it. I could put on Live at Leeds and figure out the bass parts and not have a problem. I mean, it's just, that's what it is. But by the time you get to Stravinsky, doing it by ear and reverse engineering, it's just not going to work. So, so that was kind of the Rubicon for me. And I said, all right, I got to buckle down and figure this out.
Man, so your introduction to classical was Carl Stalling.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Actually, I loved Scott Bradley, the guy that did all the Tom and Jerry cartoons, all the original stuff, right? Yes. And I spoke with someone a long time ago, one of our artists, her uncle was, I think, I believe he for a time was the concertmaster in the MGM orchestra that was doing the recordings under Scott Bradley, who was the conductor and the composer and the conductor. And what I learned, which I didn't know, was that Bradley would spend a tremendous amount of time writing these kind of prefab cues. So what he had was an island, like islands of scores, right? These little kind of sections and such, which he would then kind of, arranged, not necessarily on the spot, but he would be mixing and matching and saying this to that, to this, to that, to that, to that. Like a kind of a very early form of adaptive music, which we now see in video games, Fortnite or whatever. And so I didn't know that at the time, but looking back, it's like, that is immensely complicated material. When you listen to Tom and Jerry, it's like you're going insane.
Yeah, it is.
It's just great stuff. So yeah, so I always loved it, and where I am now, it kind of is the culmination of my Tom and Jerry listening.
Oh, that is amazing. I remember back in the mid '90s or so, they came out with a CD, the Carl Stalling Project, and it was like a compilation of a whole bunch of the cartoon music that he had done. It was wonderful. I don't think I have it anymore, unfortunately, but it was awesome. You could just drive in your car and start and listen to cartoon music all day long.
Oh man, I'm obsessed with cartoon music. I'm really obsessed with television theme songs. I've been obsessed my whole life, and even to the extent that my band Dreadnaught, we put together an evening length, essentially suite of TV theme songs called Dreadnaught She Wrote, which we've performed a couple times, but it's really something, I'll tell you. The audience likes it.
When did you pick up the 8-string bass? Going back to you playing music, how did you get into such a huge, complex instrument?
Well, the 8-string bass is such a cool instrument because it's like the bass version of a 12-string guitar. So you've got this kind of the strings are doubled, you got the octaves. It's this kind of massive bell-like piano-esque sound. And I loved it since I was a kid because of guys like Entwistle and hearing them play that thing. And I looked and searched for years and years. And I finally found one in Australia. And I had it shipped to where I live. And I explained to the guy, listen, I've wanted this thing for years. It's the exact make I wanted. I play these basses called alembic basses. I love them.
Oh, okay.
And I said, listen, this is how you ship it. I gave all the instructions, right? This thing shows up at my front door. I'll never forget it. It was a Saturday morning. Shows up at my front door. It's just a case, a guitar case. And the thing is huge. I could fit you and me in it, right? It's so huge. And it's wrapped in one layer of tiny bubble wrap that doesn't even cover the whole case. Like the top and the bottom are exposed. The handle is exposed. And it's just like one layer. And I look at it and I go, oh, fuck. And, I don't care about the money. I mean, I don't care about the insurance. I'll get the money back. I want the bass. Yeah. And I opened it up, and not only was there like no packing, no stuffing, nothing in it, it was just sitting there in the case. Amazingly enough, it was in perfect shape. And I just sat there. I looked up to the sky and I just went, mwah.
Yep.
And ever since then, it's really been one of my real basses of choice in the studio. And I love the sound you can get out of it. And playing in a trio, we all like to make a lot of sound,
right?
And that helps with that endeavor.
That I'm glad you described it the bass itself that way, because I'm an amateur musician. I just bang around on an old guitar in my room, and that's as far as it's ever gone. So when I hear 8-string bass, I'm thinking something that's going to look like a Chapman stick or something. But
right.
When you said it's like a 12-string guitar, instantly I knew exactly what you're talking about. And I didn't think of it that way at all. I thought it was just going to be some monstrosity of a handheld instrument, but
those things scare me, man. I see people on like Instagram. Well, first of all, I try to not go on Instagram anymore because it just depresses me. I see these kids who have techniques. I mean, it makes me feel like so inadequate. Well, at least I can run a company. But like I see these instruments that look like they're attacking the people that are playing them, and I go, I'm still a simple guy. I'm a 4-string player. I'm a 4-string fretted player. I can muck around on a bunch of other things, but that's my bag. And I play with a pick, and I've always played with a pick since I was a kid. Again, because of Entwistle and Chris Squire from Yes, and all these guys, and so it's a very unbass playerly thing to do. And anyone who's heard my music, they know I'm an extraordinarily unbass playery musician as a bass player. So I'm the anti-bassist in a lot of ways.
Interesting. Well, as the anti-bassist, how did Dreadnaught actually get started? Did you found the band, or was it just a group of guys jamming together and said, hey, let's just play out? How did it come together?
It's a good question. So I went to school up in Vermont. I went to the University of Vermont for a couple of years. And after leaving high school, where I'm playing in 6 bands at a time, we're all gigging. I mean, we were really doing stuff. And And it was just an amazing time. And there was all this just great creativity going around, and we're recording and playing and, and playing and simultaneously in all these different styles of bands and hardcore and soul and all this stuff. So I had this band in high school with my buddy Ed that I mentioned earlier. And we were like, I don't know, it was like a 10 or 12 piece band. We had guitars, bass, drums, backup singers, horns. And this is, a bunch of high school kids doing soul music. It was really a ton of fun. And coming off of that, we were just doing like covers and stuff, but I had my own original bands in high school, and we were just starting to really kind of find our way. And I thought, okay, I'll go to college, I'll go up to UVM, and it's going to be a great music scene up there. I've heard all about it. This band Fish is blowing up and all that stuff, right? And so I go up there and Burlington's an amazing place and I love it.
I have heard that. I had one band from Burlington on Vacant Lots, and they love it up there.
It's a marvelous place. It's awesome, but it's really isolated, right? Like you don't have a huge pool of places to play.
Right.
So anyway, after a couple of years, it was just kind of just not really working for me musically at all. And I called my buddy Ed and I said, how's it going for you? He's just like, meh. And he said, how's it going for you? I said, meh. Yeah. And I figured, well, what if I transfer down to the University of New Hampshire where he was going to school? And a ton of my buddies from high school, elementary school, middle school, et cetera, they're all going to school there as well. And we still talk. In fact, as I was getting on the phone with you right now, one of those buddies was sending me emails repeatedly of Far Side cartoons. Great, stop sending me emails. I'm doing an interview right now, dude. And so anyway, so I transferred down there, and that was 25 years ago, which is where I am right now. And I started Dreadnaught 25 years ago, immediately after that. And it was really, Ed and I started to play out. We met a drummer named Rick, who is of course the drummer for Dreadnaught, and a few other folks that we said, hey, why don't we start to play? So we started off as a bigger kind of, I think we're 6 or 7 guys, doing the kind of college thing. Yeah. And playing gigs and traveling around and drinking beers and having a great time. And we eventually kind of settled down into a group of 3. Ed went off did his own thing. Other guys in the band also went off and did their own thing. And we brought on a guy named Justin around the year 1999 or so, Justin Walton. And so his band that he had kind of merged with me and Rick and the stuff that we were doing. And then the 3 of us went off and did our thing together. So the first record we put out after a couple of years of playing together was called The American Standard. And that was in 2001. So 20 years ago, this June. From that point on, we just kind of kept moving. So yeah, that's how it all began.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. So how did you guys come up with the name Dreadnaught? That's a great name.
No, it's a horrible name. Everybody,
I love it.
Terrible. Everybody spells it wrong. There's many. There come to find out, there's many of them in the world. Although we were, I think maybe the second. There was a Dreadnaught in Australia before us. Although I still propose we have a battle royale for the naming rights. although based on the condition of my Dreadnaught, I'm not sure we would even get in the ring. But
you also don't want to screw around with too many Aussies. They're a tough group of people.
They're a tough crew, but it's kind of, as you said before, a bunch of guys, we got together and we're like, all right, oh man, okay, so we have a gig, and we were getting ready for the gig, and the gig was live radio at WUNH on the college radio station, and we didn't have a name, and it was sitting there. And so at the time, what we were doing for this radio performance was just like acoustic guitars, me on electric bass, percussion, blah blah blah. And so Ed was like, let's just call it Dreadnaught, because he was playing his Dreadnaught-shaped Martin guitar.
Nice.
And we just went, okay, fine. And that's it. We played the gig, and that's it.
God, I hear that story so often. It's amazing how many times it happened, and then the name sticks. Like, this name is just a placeholder. We'll think about it later, and then you just get gig after gig lined up, and it's that's what it is.
I think right there you have really identified what life is.
Yeah.
It's everybody's saying, oh, no, this is just temporary. And the next thing you know, right?
25 years have passed and we still haven't come up with our real name yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well,
everything is only temporary.
Oh, yeah. Well, I went and tried to go back into listen to as much as I could, but I mean, your discography is, that's like nearly 1,000 recording and production credits. So I apologize for probably missing a couple here. But I did get a chance to go back and listen to the vast majority of the Dreadnaught discography. And what I love about it is that the band kind of sounds like if Frank Zappa had joined Yes. Especially songs like The Badger or Taking a Ride with the Fat Man. There's just the seriousness of Yes in the music, but with the humor of Zappa in the lyrics, and it kind of creeps into the music too.
Taking a ride with the fat man, taking a ride. Fat to pop pop. Taking a ride with the fat man, taking a ride. Fat to pop pop. Taking a ride with the fat man, taking a ride. Fat to pop pop. Taking a ride with the fat man, taking a ride. Fat to pop pop.
Oh, yeah.
So I kind of, that's the best way I could think of. If somebody were to ask me what Dreadnaught sounded like today, that's what I would say. If Yes had Frank Zappa writing the music.
It's a really good way of putting it, and I think I've heard similar. I've heard, Willie Nelson thrown into that mix. I've heard Dixie Briggs, this kind of stuff. Listen, man, the weird thing about Dreadnaught is that we are a genre of one, and we are simultaneously the absolute best and the absolute worst in that genre. and it's an amazing thing to be able to say that, right?
Yeah.
Because the music really defies description, and I think it's very much the product of us being in the same room and wanting to laugh. I just want to laugh in my life, in my work, everything. I try and smile. You can probably hear it as I'm speaking. Like I smile when I talk.
Yes.
I try and have fun, right? And with the Dreadnaught stuff, as I think I said to you in a text message last night, I mean, we sound like a hammer in a washing machine, right? Like it's like it's just. So I don't think that commercial success was ever either in the cards or necessarily our intent. And in fact, I recall one gig where we got done playing. I think we're on the road someplace, we're touring, and someone walked up to us in with all earnestness, not a shred of irony, said to us, "Why would you make music like this?" If you had any intent of attracting people, why would you do this? And the answer is because it pleases me. And I think, I think it's okay to be selfish. I think Dreadnaught is a great example of that. And I think that, the audience that you really should be trying to please is yourself and your collaborators and your peers and your bandmates. And we please ourselves. And if other people find it humorous and enjoyable, well, then that's great. But I do think that from the kind of stylistic and technical standpoint, you kind of hit on something. One, we really do like odd architecture musically. We do like complex stuff.
Yeah.
We do like really unusual interlocking sounds. I think that we take a page from the Queen kind of book in terms of our use of the studio when we are orchestrating our own material, for example. And we also really just want to have fun and to be audacious musically and to do stuff that is just going to make you chuckle. Like I think of like Bo Legba on Hard Chargin', for example.
Yes.
It's a really like minimalist, groovy, funky thing with this weird Steely Dan kind of fusion vibe with nonsense lyrics, right?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And that's kind of like what we like to do is to shove all of our influences into a blender and see what it tastes like today.
Well, it's crazy. I was listening to Have a Drink with Dreadnaught, the song originally. Yeah. I listened to the EP afterwards, but I'm listening to it, and I'm listening to it at work, And I just kind of stopped because I realized I had no idea what was going on. I mean, musically, it was great. I was really enjoying it. But then I was hearing the lyrics, and I don't know what the hell's going on. There's baby polar bears, ponchos, drinks being poured, and apparently it's all happened to me before.
Correct. Yeah.
But I had no idea what the hell was going on. But it was so much fun to listen to. And I mean,
I was just going to say, it's kind of like, when you go into the museum and you see some type of phantasmagorical, fantasy landscape that clearly was going on in somebody else's brain.
Right.
And you're just trying to find something that you can identify with, something you can latch onto. And if you find that thing and you hold on tight, it's a hell of a ride, right? Like that's our goal.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Gaudy Baubles and Express Delight. Those two songs were just blowing me away. I mean, I'm actually equal parts in awe and laughing throughout the entire Hard Charging album, but especially That's the Way You Do It Your Way.
Yes.
That song, just the way you did that destroyed me. The vocals just killed me.
I'm glad. I'm really happy that you appreciate that. And it's nice to talk to somebody who clearly has a sick, fucked up sense of humor. It's always a relief. It takes one to know one, as Dreadnaught would say.
Exactly.
But, again, that's one of those things like where we just were in the basement. And I remember when we wrote those tunes in those three, and it was like I remember I had a meal, and it was rabbit three ways, right? It's like the little rabbit leg and the little rabbit breast and the little rabbit brain. And I looked at that and I'm like, first of all, am I going to eat that fucking brain? Yeah. It looks like a walnut. Second of all, that would be a cool idea for some tunes. And we sat down and we ripped those three out in like an hour. But it's only when you get in the studio and you really begin to have some fun with it and you begin to say, well, how far are we going to push this, right?
Yeah.
And our theory is, generally speaking, bend it till it breaks, and then maybe go one step back if we feel like it.
Right. I like that.
If we feel like it.
One of my favorite tracks is on the Have a Drink EP, Surface Raid. Song is incredible. But I do want to tell you that your tone on everything you've done is amazing. It's like you're like the peanut butter of bassists.
It goes with banana. It goes with jelly.
It does.
Goes with
bread.
Yeah.
You've got this. Your crunchy tone is just as beautiful as the smooth tone.
Oh, I really appreciate that.
So
I was going to say, like, I spend a lot of time thinking about how to structure stuff in the studio, and I think. We'll get to it later, but on my new record, on Playland Arcade, my solo record, I think there's a lot of the same kind of conceptualization of instrumentation, right? I fundamentally have rejected the notion that a bass part should be, quote unquote, one layer at the bottom that goes on after the drums, before the guitar, to support the vocal.
Right.
And if you listen to the tracks, the Dreadnaught tracks, my solo tracks, if you listen to them on headphones, the goal is to have this really antiphonal stereo sense and structure where your eyes and your ears are kind of going in different directions. It's right. And to use these contrasts in the textures and the sounds and the structure to create dynamism. And I don't think I've made a track in years that didn't have less than half a dozen bass parts on it. Right?
Wow.
I mean, it's just the way I conceive of it, and the way I do it. And it's taken a long time to develop that. And the other guys in Dreadnaught, it's a similar thing, of course. But with the bass parts, it really is something different and weird, which I don't hear very often in other people's recordings.
No, that's for sure. And unfortunately, I think, bass tends to get a little lost in most bands. And you just don't hear really interesting. I don't want to say I don't, but it's you have to search out interesting prog stuff, and I guess maybe you've always had to, because it's never had the outside of bands like Rush and Yes, it's its own thing, and not everybody gets it or likes it. So you have to really sift through music to try to find something that you like. Because prog, there's so many different variants of prog. You know, there's and what one prog genre, subgenre that one person likes, a lot of other people might not, and it's just a fascinating rabbit hole to go down.
Oh man, so there you go. You really hit it, right? Like Dreadnaught should appeal to, in theory, should appeal to a big chunk of people who like prog rock. But there's certain things about us that turns off a lot of the audience, and that specifically is stuff like chicken picking guitar, two steps, Americana, stuff that is not identified with the kind of European tradition of quote unquote European tradition of prog rock.
Right.
So what I've always wondered about is, for a sub-market which is so interested in thinking about how expansive its mindset is, it's awfully parochial when it comes down to, including something that, right? Like, it's what? Like, aren't we supposed to be like the mind expanding set here? But no, and it's so interesting because I was saying to one of my, the guys that works for me today, and a good buddy of mine, of like 20 plus years, we're talking about prog rock and stuff. And I mentioned the band Gentle Giant, which is one of my favorite bands.
Oh, yeah,
and I just had a correspondence with Derek Schulman, the lead singer.
Oh, wow.
And I just wrote him a quick note and just said, hey, listen, man, you've really been an inspiration to me over the years, and I wanted to sing you my new record. And the reason why is because, Derek Schulman went from being the lead singer of a prog rock band to being a really successful music label executive, right? I mean, he signed a lot of bands in the 80s. He broke a lot of groups. He signed Tears for Fears. He signed Bon Jovi.
Oh, wow, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, man. And this guy, he was so shrewd and so smart, and he's such a wonderful operator, right? He wrote right back a couple minutes later, and he's like, oh, thank you so much. And it was just wonderful to hear right back from one of your heroes. But
that's amazing.
But I was telling my buddy about this, and I sent them a video of these guys playing live. I'm like, these guys never achieved mass success. You're about to see why, right? I mean, it's just like this unbelievable concert where the musicianship is so out there. It's so incredible, but it incorporates, of course, like elements of medieval music, Baroque music, all these things that a chunk of the prog rock audience is going to just turn their nose up at. Yeah. And then plus the thing with a group like Gentle Giant, you're like one letter off of Genesis and the record bands. I can't imagine how horrible that must have been going through the 70s.
God, yeah. Yeah. So speaking of heroes and giants, you got a chance to work with some of your heroes. You've actually played with John Entwistle, and you've done work with Pete Townshend. How did that happen? How do you end up getting to work with your heroes?
Oh man, life is strange, right?
Yeah.
It really is. And I think I said this the day to a buddy. I said, if I could go back and tell the 12-year-old me what's happened in my life, right? Like if I could just find a way to explain to him as he's picking up the bass, maybe not for the first time, but maybe I've been playing for 6 months or whatever.
Yeah.
If I could say, hey, listen, this is what's going to happen. First of all, he'd be pumped. He'd be like, that's awesome. Second, he'd probably be like, what took so fucking long?
Yeah.
Like, what's your problem? Get your head out of your ass, man. It's one of these kind of twists and turns of life where you can just ram your head up against the wall repeatedly and never notice that, if you just went around the corner of the building, there's an open door. And I think that this is something I've seen over and over again in life, in business and music. When you see a line, don't get in it, because there might be a different way through. And it's human nature to go get in the line. And I think that the thing that I've always tried to do is to figure out, well, is there another way I can make this happen? With the Entwistle thing, it was crazy because I really did just bang my head up against the wall, smashed my head up against the wall, to quote his first solo record, right? For 8 years, I tried to get a gig opening up for him, phone calls, emails, press kits. I mean, I did everything. And I finally got the gig. Why did I get the gig? Because the venue where it was going to take place was owned by a guy for whom I did a lot of favors, and not because I wanted anything, but because he said, hey, listen, I need you to, fill in for a band next week. You guys free? Sure, we're free. Yeah. And when the time came for me to ask for a favor, I got it. And I got to play with my hero and hang out with my idol, which was amazing. Like, I mean, man. It was one of the last gigs he ever played. He died just a few months after that, maybe 7 or 8 months after that.
Wow.
And so it was really amazing. And to hear him play in the honor of having him hear me play, right? To stand on the side of the stage, he'd, listen to my sound check, watch me play in the gig. Boy, that was, I'm just kind of looking off out my window right now, staring up, thinking that was something special.
Yeah.
And on the Pete side too, right? Like it was crazy. I could have spent my whole life trying to play bass on a Pete Townshend record, or ask him to co-write a song or whatever. If going that route, I could have done it, and I did try to do it for sure.
Right.
But sometimes that's not the right way through, and it just so happened that but he had a project that was stalled, and I could help, and could help kind of close it out and bring it to market, which is one of my specialties as a producer, right? I finish things. You've alluded to how many credits I have in my resume. I tend to finish stuff.
Yeah.
And again, it was one of those things where it's like, well, there's just a different way forward. And I've said this many times in many different settings, but I remember walking up to Pete's door and for the first time when I went to his house, because we had a difficulty. There was a problem that needed to be solved with our project, and he had a problem, and I had to fix it. And I remember knocking on the door, and as the door opens and I see Pete Townshend standing there in front of me, it went very quickly from this being my hero to oh my God, I love the guitar tone, to this is my client, this is my artist, he has a problem and I have to fix it. And it was like, wow, like that, just like I had to flip a switch. And that's happened to me so many times in my life. And in fact, I really like to flip that switch, because people are put on pedestals, celebrities are put on pedestals. You probably know, and maybe your listeners know, I've been working with Dan Brown, the author of the Da Vinci Code, for the last six years producing music. And here's a guy who is on so many pedestals, and there's so much pressure on him and so many perceptions about him. And it's just nice to move past that and to just get to the work. And that's been my experience no matter who I work with. I love to move past the ego. I put my ego in a very, very tiny or large box, and I bury it. And that's what I expect everybody else to do, so we can do the thing that we're here to do, which is to do good work together. And for me, that's been the key.
Well, that's part of being a professional, you're not there to fawn all over him. You're there to help him solve a problem. That's why he hired you.
But that's I think it's like anything in life, right? It's just remembering that the other person on the other end of the line is it's a real person. It's you. And,
exactly.
Everybody, I was reminded of what my dad told me once when I was, thinking about all these problems. He said, listen, you got a boat, you got boat problems. And it's really good advice. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what level you're at, right? Whatever you got, if you got a cell phone, you got cell phone problems. Something's going to go wrong with whatever you got. So just deal with it and move on.
Exactly. All right. Before we get into your album, I want to ask you a question based more on the PARMA side of things.
Sure.
You do a lot of work with classical music, and with streaming and the way the music industry has shifted, I've got a couple questions about classical music. First of all, what does the future look like right now for classical music as far as getting people to listen to it? And do you see a lot of young musicians composing or playing classical or orchestral music these days?
Well, I think I can answer the first question by answering the second. Okay. I think both are in many ways identical, really.
Okay.
So on the latter point, yes, I see an awful lot of really interesting stuff go on, right? My company, we have our finger on the pulse. We have our ear to the ground. Let's use every cliche in the book. We are paying attention to everything all the time. And what's been really encouraging for me to see is a couple things. First of all, that more and more classical, quote unquote, ensembles, however you want to define them, quote unquote classical, quote unquote ensemble, they're acting like bands, right? String quartets, chamber groups, choirs, all these different kinds of ensembles. They're no longer acting like what used to be a classical group. They're now understanding that, we got to get out there. We got to pound the pavement. We got to do the things that a band would do. So I'm happy to see this market that I love, to see the style of music that I love, migrate towards where I was when I was a little kid. And I don't mean that to sound condescending at all. But growing up as being a rock and roll kid, you get an understanding, like we said before. You got to put the posters up, right?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing an awful lot of that. I'm seeing an awful lot of desire in the part of younger composers to really do unusual things, to not be worried at all about what the barriers are, to not be worried at all about what the rules are, to not take their art so seriously. I think that is only a good thing. It makes me so happy, right?
Yeah.
I think to kind of address the first part of your question, or the first question is, it's going to take some time for this to wash out, for the old stuff to wash out. And by that, I mean the kind of much more traditional, don't clap between movements, be quiet in your seat kind of experience. I think that, I mean, for better or for worse, that generation is dying out. Financially, that generation has kept classical music afloat for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm happy to see a much more entrepreneurial spirit amongst younger composers, younger performers, because there's now a greater understanding that, we're no longer hogs at the trough, right? We can't just say we're going to play Beethoven and expect to get donor money and then keep doing it year over year over year.
Right.
And I guess the last broad thing I would say is we're seeing in classical music what's happening in the rest of the world, which is an understanding that there has been and there has always been an inequity in the market and in the system. And there have been so many voices neglected for so long. And when you think about the fact that, look, it's indisputable Beethoven has some great music. He has some shit pieces too. He's got some great music. It's indisputable that Chopin was a virtuoso, beyond the beyond. But those are the end result of a winnowing process, which was determined by people who had certain vested interests. And now we're seeing that all being turned up in its head. And I am so happy, so unbelievably happy to see what have been traditionally neglected minorities and neglected groups, women, people of color, Asian Americans, et cetera, fill in the blank. These are the groups which are now coming to prominence. And guess what? These are the people who have something to say of real interest, because, when I said before about going through the hammers of hell, perspective comes out of going through the hammers of hell. And everybody's hammers are different. And it's just a matter of how you express it. So I think what we're seeing is, to sum it all up, we're certainly seeing a death of the old and a birth of the new. I hope to be the accelerant on that process, because I really do think that a more informed, more egalitarian world is a better world.
Yeah. Well, that's good news to hear, that perspective on it, because I don't know. I don't hear, I'm not in that world, but I do love classical music, and I like to hear new compositions. So that's really encouraging news.
Well, look, there's a couple things to keep in mind here. When you think about the pandemic has accelerated everything, right?
Right.
Brooks Brothers wasn't going to be a 500-year empire, for God's sakes. I mean, people were going to stop wearing suits to work at a certain point.
Right.
But what was going to be a 20 or 10-year cycle was compressed down to 1 or 2. We're seeing the same thing, I think, in terms of the change in classical music, where, for example, one of the problems that we've always had is that there are a lot of reviewers who have no interest in touching digital products. In fact, that when this has got to be 15 years ago, I kind of innovated this concept of bundling the scores and parts of classical music along with a CD. Now, go figure, CD, right? You put the CD in the machine, and guess what? It opens up an interface where you can access the score and parts. So if you buy the CD, you actually get the printed music. You don't have to go to the music publisher.
That's amazing.
Right. So this kind of thing, all of that was happening way back then that I was trying to get going, but the pandemic has radically accelerated that. And these reviewers now, for example, the press, they have no choice. People couldn't actually go any place to mail out physical product.
Right.
So, I know the pandemic has been a horrific thing, but it certainly has been horrific. But as I've described it to some folks, like, if somebody comes up to me and they say, look, here's a giant wall-sized canvas and 1,000 colors of paint, go paint your masterpiece. That's really hard. But if someone says, okay, I need a 15-second piece of music in the key of A minor, and I need 3 instruments, all acoustic, go. And that's way easier to do, right? And I think the pandemic has made all those decisions and solutions for people that much more apparent. Your priorities become much more clear. And I think that in classical music, and I even think in other types, pop, touring musicians, everybody's had to reckon with what the reality of the situation is. And I think that's only a good thing, because it makes for a more malleable, flexible art and group of artists.
Well, you mentioned short songs, and I wanted to talk about your album, but I'm not sure how to qualify your album, your this new album that's coming out, because Playland Arcade, it's being billed as your debut, but you've also done a an album of 7 second songs.
Yes, I did. Yes.
Which I don't know if we can consider an entire album that's 49 seconds long as a debut album, but maybe. I don't know.
I think it rather stretches the definition, but yes, yes, I had that in my mind. And I just one day I was like, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And what's interesting is that it's only out on Bandcamp, and it's not distributed on major digital platforms, which is why I'm considering Playland Arcade to be my debut.
Okay.
And the reason why is because it's too short. The songs are too short. Spotify won't accept 7-second songs.
Really?
Yeah, there's certain issues with it. So yeah. So anyway, I'm hoping to overcome that with the 7-second song that's on my new album, but we'll cross that bridge later. But yeah, it's a fun record. It's a cool record. It's a producer's record for sure.
It is.
Yeah, I hope you dig it. I hope you had a fun time listening to it.
I had a blast. It was so much fun. Now, when we talk about a song on the show, I usually go back and post, and I include like a 30-second clip of whatever song we're discussing. But that would basically be your entire album.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. I don't know. My show is on Spotify, and I get in trouble if I put an entire album up there as part of a podcast. I don't know what they would think.
That's crazy.
Am I allowed to put an entire album, even if since it's under a minute long?
Yeah, I'd say go for it. I've always believed that it's better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. So go forth and conquer. I, as the creator, will bless you. I approve.
But now that's all joking aside, that's got to be challenging to write, a really interesting 7-second song.
Yes, I think short music is incredibly challenging for the exact reasons I described before. The constraints are so tight that you have to make certain decisions, and it's a finite universe, right?
Yeah.
And I've always loved short tunes. I love long tunes too. Like you mentioned, "Taking a Ride with the Fat Man" before.
Yeah.
Like the last tune on Hard Charge and Mummies of the Cavalcanti. That's a big ass epic.
Oh yes.
And in fact, the new Dreadnaught record, which comes out later this summer, it really is basically one 34-minute piece of music. It's just split up into movements, right? Like it's all instrumental, but it's one thing. But yeah, I've always appreciated this kind of short taste in the fast amuse-bouche to kind of cleanse the palate and whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that on Playland Arcade. And I like contrast. I like confusing people. I like to be confused. I like to be spun around and just disoriented and then have to figure out my way out. And I think this record, it's kind of the audio version of doing that to a listener.
You know what? I was actually just kind of talking with somebody about that the other last week in a podcast format. You have guests on. You basically have one host and a producer or a co-host or something, and one of them sets everything up, but the host has no idea what's going on during the podcast. I think that would be hilarious. You have the topic. He has no idea what the topic is until the podcast starts.
I adore it. I think that's brilliant. I think you should totally do it. It's fantastic. I mean it. I love that stuff. Right? That's the fun stuff. That's where the good stuff happens. And it's like, look, being a producer of anything, whether it's a podcast or a record, it's about creating certain conditions. And the conditions that you create, those determine what the output is. Now, you can really determine what the output is by the conditions you create. So it all depends what you want to do. And to achieve a certain effect, whether it's surprise or calm or whatever, that's the producer's job. So I think it's a brilliant idea. I think you should do it.
Oh, I'm going to have to try to figure out who to get involved on that one. But all right, so let's actually get to your album, Playland Arcade. I'll tell you, it's when you say it's a ride, it really is. You've got some awesome stuff. Like okay, I'll throw out some of the ones that are my favorites. Like Frido and Siege are awesome. They sound like they're 8-bit video game jams.
Totally, that's the idea.
Oh, they're awesome, and I love that. I remember about a year ago hearing somebody on YouTube doing like an 8-bit version of Stairway to Heaven or something, and I thought it was hilarious.
I love it.
And then I hear Frido and Siege, and I'm like, this is cool. This is, instead of somebody doing an 8-bit cover of somebody, you're jamming in 8-bit world, and it's really cool.
Right? I mean, I love it. I think it's fun and funky. And those two that you picked are interesting because those are the first and the last tracks in the record, right? Those are the bookends. And for your listeners, it's really the sound of the boardwalk, right? So I live in a beach town. Okay. And we've got our boardwalk, we've got our fried dough, we've got our skee ball, we've got the whole bit, right? And this album is kind of the story of one of those days that I've been going to the beach since I was a little kid. I've been going to the Playland Arcade, which is the name of the arcade down at the beach right down the road from me. Oh, awesome. Since I was a little boy. I take my staff up until this past year with the pandemic. I've been taking my staff out there every summer for Boardwalk Day. We go and I give money and we go play video games. We have a great time.
Awesome.
And those two tracks that you just identified, I think, are the two that really they bookend the record, and I think they certainly sum up the record quite well.
Man, you're making me want to work for you. Jeez.
I do my best.
No, but there's also such a wide variety of sounds, and you've got like a surf western sound on Backward Swan and Western Vice. There's bits that sound like they're out of soundtracks, like Lobster Roll.
Yeah.
Tenderly sounds like it could have been on David Lynch's Lost Highway.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Yeah.
And, rest in peace, Walter Olkowitz, the great Went.
Yeah.
He passed away, I guess, today or last night.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh.
Yes. If you like Twin Peaks, the guy.
Yeah, sure.
The great Went. I'm as blank as a fart.
I am as blank as a fart.
Okay, well, all right.
He passed away.
Moment of silence. Jeez. Pity.
Okay. And then there's the songs that should be mandatorily played where I live. I live just outside of Washington, D.C. Fanfare for a Losing Team.
Yep.
That should be played at FedEx Field and Capital One Arena until either the Washington football team, whatever they're going to call themselves, and the Wizards can do something. It should be mandatory that Fanfare for a Losing Team plays in those stadiums.
From your lips to God's ears, man. I totally agree. I'd love those royalties too. That would be delightful.
That would be awesome. But I think my favorite track on the entire album is Mighty Forces. Because when the violin starts playing and then the drum just kicks in underneath it, it's just amazing. It's so powerful.
You know, I thank you for bringing that one up, because that's a really weird tune in some ways, and it's weird because it's the most simple in some respects.
Okay.
And like, there's another element of this record that I was really going for, which is kind of like this concept of minimalist maximalism, right?
Okay.
I think like Siege does it quite a bit too, and there's a lot on this record which is very static and very kind of basic in its own way, but it's also super ultra complicated and detailed at the same time. And what I really tried to do in Mighty Forces is it's just 4 chords, right? Mm-hmm. Over and over and over and over and over again. I tried to think, like, what would Ravel do, and to some degree, if he had a synthesizer and a kick-ass drummer and violin player.
That's awesome.
You know, and that's one of those tracks. And Andy Happel, the violin player, Andy and I have been playing together for years. He's a wonderful engineer. He's worked for my company. I've played in his band. We're really good buddies, and we actually have a new project that we're about to start, which I shouldn't say anything about, but that's going to be really cool. And then Jamie Perkins, the drummer on that, man, he plays a storm, and
yes.
He's just an incredible player. So this idea, like, you know, repetitive, minimalist, like Steve Reich-esque almost, whatever loops and patterns, with this chaotic violin and drum. There was something in my head there, and I really like it. It's a real kind of emotional apex of the record. And I'm glad you dig it.
I love it. And I was walking around work today, and Yo Soy Miguel was I was just walking around, just Yo Soy Miguel. And I'm like, why?
I'm really sorry about that. I'm sorry.
People are looking at me like, you're not Miguel. What are you? Your name is Mark. But the thing that and I'm not even joking about that. That's actually a true story.
But I'm hearing this from more and more people, because guess what? It happened to me, and that's why I recorded the fucking thing, was because I was walking around. Jesus, I had to get it out of my head, you know?
Well, one of my favorite parts is, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, because this whole album, outside of 3 words, Yo Soy Miguel, it's an instrumental album. And you've got a song called Last Word.
Yep.
And which on an instrumental album I think is hilarious, but it's not even the last song, which makes it even better for me. I love that.
Yeah, you're finding all my layers here. I'm happy. Thank you. The Last Word is also perhaps my favorite cocktail of all time. So it works on many, many levels.
Oh, nice. Okay, so I have one more question for you.
Shoot.
I'm trying to look at the artwork on my phone while I'm working on this. So it's not easy for me to pinpoint everything. But is every song referenced in the artwork?
I think they're all in there.
That's pretty awesome.
I think there's some, I think there's at least oblique angles to everything in there. And the artwork is terrific. Guy that did it is a guy by the name of Edward Fleming. He works at my company, and we did this one on the side because I have my little policy of separation of church and state, where you know, PARMA is not for my music, and my music is not for PARMA.
Right.
But he did a fantastic job, and you know, there's a couple other people I think, just to kind of call them out where I had the chance, that really made a big impression on this record. But one, of course, is Jamie Perkins, the drummer I mentioned before, and he plays in a great band called the Pretty Reckless, and they just were at the top of the Billboard charts about a month ago, and they're just kicking ass, and they're a great group, and I'm so happy that he was you know, able and willing to play on the record, because he brought this whole thing to a completely different dimension, in my opinion, and I made sure that he really gave it his all. And you know, at one point he played one of my tracks, and he did it like as I had it in the demo, and he's like, "What do you think?" And I basically said, you know, you played what I had, but you didn't play what I wanted. I want you.
Right.
And I told him, I said, you know, play like a petulant child. Play like an angry, petulant child. He looked at me, he's just like, that's the stupidest production direction I've ever heard. Well, he went back in there and he did a take, and the take was what you heard on Yo Soy Miguel. So there you go.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it was good production direction.
Yes.
And then my buddy Duncan Watt, who plays keys and advised on a lot of this stuff, he really did a great job on this. He plays on a bunch of the tracks, Tenderly and a bunch of stuff. And he's just really a wonderful composer, wonderful musician, one of the best I've ever worked with. And really, like, my real partner in crime in this was John Wyman, the engineer. John is also a brilliant producer. We've been working together on a ton of stuff. He did all the Dreadnaught stuff you mentioned.
Okay.
The EPs, Hard Charging. He did our new record, which is coming out this summer, which is called Northern Burner. He also produced the Pretty Reckless record, which, again, Billboard chart-topping engineer-producer this guy is. So I really had an all-star team to make this happen. And what was enjoyable for me about the whole thing, kind of in summary, was I allowed myself to put down my instrument. And I'm only playing on half, maybe less than half of the record.
Oh, really?
And yeah, I really made a choice to be less commanded by my own hands and allow my ideas to work through other people. And it's interesting. I think before I really kind of matured as a CEO and as a manager, I probably never would have done that artistically, right? Like learning how to work through other people, learning how to give other people agency so that they can bring what they do to what you do.
Yeah.
That I guess it kind of spilled over from the business into my art. And I said, I'm really content to hand stuff to an orchestra or to a drummer or a keyboard player and not have anything to do with it and say, listen, this is my idea, you go crazy. And so, it's really gratifying.
That is wonderful, man. And it's good to learn that. And, at some point, I mean, one of these days, I'm hoping that I get busy enough where I can hand off some of the duties of this podcast to somebody. Because right now it's just me. I'm doing everything. But I've kept it for a while. Then thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the album. It's got so many twists and turns and different sounds. It's really fun to listen to.
Well, I really appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure. And thank you so much for paying attention to the music, studying it, and most importantly, laughing at it. I really appreciate it.
Well, it was my pleasure. And
awesome.
Oh, and before we go, did almost forget to ask you, how can people find the album? Where can they find it? How can they order it? Follow you on social media to find out what you're up to?
Yep. So you can find me online at boblordmusic.com. That's my solo site. My company is at PARMArecordings.com, PARMA. My band, Dreadnaught, we're at dreadnaughtrock.com. And my new album, Playland Arcade, solo record, my first, other than my 49-second debut album, which is not able to be distributed, is available on all major digital platforms on April 27. And I have no physical product coming out because as a record label owner, I have enough that I could make a large floor, which would never be penetrated.
Well, it's weird because I am a tactile person. I love having physical bits of. I love the artwork. I love being able to touch something, but I'm finding it harder and harder to find things to play my physical copies of stuff on. Yeah. I had to get a new car recently and no CD player.
Yeah, right.
I got a new laptop to edit this podcast with and to do my photography with. No disc player. I love physical copies, but companies are forcing me into unphysical media.
I know. Listen, it's difficult, right? I'm a tactile guy as well. I read physical books.
Yeah,
I tried to read a Kindle. Couldn't do it.
Where's my eyes out? I can't do it.
Absolutely, but I like to reference back and all the stuff. I love to read liner notes. I miss liner notes. I miss booklets. I miss all of this stuff. And I think the bigger issue is that there's going to be a time in our history which will be blank for data because we don't have any physical document of it.
Yeah.
And my concern is that data loss in a digital capacity might be, the data corruption over time. And I mean hundreds of years. It might be such that, we might not be able to obtain or keep the records that we had in a prior time.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that we would write in diaries and write each other notes and letters and stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole different world, man. But like I said many times, I grew up learning how to type on a typewriter, so what do I know?
Yeah, exactly. I thought having a word processor was amazing.
Exactly.
Man. All right, man. I appreciate it. And
Oh, dude, absolutely. No, I really appreciate it. And keep up the great work. And I'm thankful for the opportunity. So thanks a million.